I'm Sari.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Welcome back to Seamwork Radio, where we share practical ideas for building a creative process so you can sew with intention and joy. Today, we're talking about how to choose your next sewing skill without getting overwhelmed by all the possibilities out there. We'll cover why traditional skill levels don't tell the whole story, how to identify techniques that'll actually build your confidence, and my favorite approach for making new skills stick by learning as you sew. All right. So, Haley, our icebreaker for today. Tell me about a time when you learned a new sewing technique that completely changed how you felt about a project or about sewing in general.
This is tough because I've had so many of these moments, but I will say that I think that the times that I've had these moments most often have usually been around finishing techniques. Like when I learned how to do like a flat felled seam or had to do like a bagged lining or a bound like edge finish. And just I feel like learning those techniques and then also taking the time to apply them in my finished projects, like really those projects tend to have a lot more longevity in my wardrobe. The thing that I like, the blouse that I took the time to do French seams on, for instance.
Yeah.
So they just feel like more special and like something that there's no way I could afford to buy that in a store.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking something similar, which is that when I first started sewing, I didn't really know about finishing techniques. And I was always kind of like, well, how do you make it look not so tatty on the inside, you know?
Yeah.
Like it gets all shredded in the wash and everything like that. And I didn't have a serger when I first, started sewing. And I didn't really know about, using a zigzag or anything like that. It took me a while to figure all that out. And then once I learned about finishing and all the different techniques you could use and how to apply them, I felt like my sewing really leveled up.
Yeah.
So that is one of them. I think another thing was just all the different things you can do with bias tape when I kind of started experimenting with that more.
Yeah.
Not just bindings and facings, your typical things, but actual details that you can add to clothing and use them to make, loops, and you can use them to make, different kind of like applique shapes on your clothing, all really fun stuff. It made me realize that there are these materials like bias tape and other things that are just so versatile and so fun to play with. And I think that really kind of opened up a world of details to me.
Yeah.
That made sewing feel really fun and creative. And it still feels that way to me. And I still love adding little details and making clothes my own when I'm sewing. So it was a great question, a great way to start this episode too. So if you have a question for us for a future episode, you can leave your icebreaker for us in a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and we'll answer it in a future episode. Or if you're a Seamwork member, just leave it for us in the community. We have a thread there for icebreakers that you can find and leave us a question. All right, well, let's get into our topic. And I think one of the most common questions I get from sewists is just what should I learn next? And especially if you're new, I get why this feels really overwhelming if sewing is something a little new to you. But even if you're a little bit more experienced, it can be kind of overwhelming because there's just so much out there. And when you look at sewing resources online, you'll see everything kind of labeled as beginner, intermediate, or advanced. But honestly, those categories don't really help you figure out what's going to move the needle for your specific sewing goals. And I remember when I was first learning to sew, I felt really stuck because I could sew a basic dress, but I wasn't sure if I should learn more about fitting or tailoring techniques or maybe something completely different like embroidery. It just felt like it would take forever to master everything. It just felt like there was this huge world of stuff to know, and I didn't know where to start. And the truth is, I was asking the wrong question. Instead of what should I learn next, I should have been asking, what do I want to make? And then what skills do I need to get there? And that shift in thinking really completely changed how I approach learning new techniques. And it's really helped me just feel so much more intentional about the time I spend on building skills. So Haley, when you're trying to decide what new technique to tackle, what usually drives that decision for you?
I think it's like you were saying, it's about what I want to make, and like the skills are the vehicles that get me there. So what train do I need to get on to get there?
Yeah.
Do I need to learn how to like sew a welt pocket or bound buttonholes or like whatever it is? I'm very like project or idea driven when it comes to my learning.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, truthfully, when I first learned to sew, I learned how to sew in a fashion design program. So my curriculum was very much laid out for me, um, semester by semester. I knew what I was going to sew, but that was just like a 4-year program, and I learned a lot in it, and it was very technically focused. But when I got out of school and I continued sewing and started sewing for myself more seriously, that's the pivot that I took, was just, I'm just going to like learn the things I want to make.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like now, especially, it's not just a matter of learning new things, but also what I want to practice and get better at as well. And I think my projects usually drive that too. But I think it does go both ways to some degree, because sometimes I get inspired by new techniques or practicing a certain technique. For example, I get excited about doing some tailoring, and I'll want to make a coat specifically because of that. And then I'll, usually have something in mind, a type of coat I want to make, and then get excited about that project. But sometimes it does go both ways. But I think what's important is that the motivation usually comes from making something and actually creating something versus just adding another skill.
Do you think there's a difference between learning techniques because you should versus learning them because you're like excited for a specific project?
Definitely. I think it can be, I don't know, it can be kind of daunting for me to learn a technique without a specific project that I feel really motivated by.
Yeah.
So if I don't have something kind of pulling me forward that I'm really excited about, then it can be hard to really get into what I'm making, which is why, when we conceived of our skills workshops, we wanted to teach specific skills, but at the same time, help people to find real projects that they could make and projects of their own choice that they could make to practice those skills on. And I think that's a really important component of them, is that you're making something you actually want to make.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that choosing, having like a choice in the matter, like really changes the motivation, and making sure that you consider that is what's going to help you to maintain your momentum when you're learning how to sew, especially in those like early days.
Yeah. So I feel like when you're very first starting out, you can feel like, well, I have to make, a wrap skirt or pajama pants or whatever the simple projects are. But if you can at least find something that you're excited to make, it's going to really increase your motivation to keep going.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, well, we're going to share some tips with you today to help you out with this. And the first one is one thing that I think is just foundational to everything we do at Seamwork, and that's to start with your vision. So start with your vision and not skill labels necessarily. So instead of thinking, I'm a beginner, so I should learn X, or I have to make, this type of project, ask yourself, what do I want my handmade wardrobe to look like? So maybe you dream of wearing beautifully fitted blazers, or you want to make all your own lingerie, or you're drawn to garments with really interesting details like pin tucks or bound buttonholes. I think your personal vision should drive your skill building and not some arbitrary progression chart. So I think of it like this. If you were learning to cook, you wouldn't just learn techniques in order of difficulty. You'd learn the techniques you need to make the foods that you actually want to eat. Yes, there are definitely some foundational things you need to know about cooking, and there are some foundational things you need to know about sewing. But once you have those foundations, it's really about what you are interested in and what you want to make for yourself. So, Haley, what's something you learned to sew because you had a specific vision for how you wanted to dress?
I think that fitting, I know that's like it's a sewing technique and it's not. I think that was a big thing for me because by the time I started sewing for myself, I had a lot of the techniques down. I had a lot of the knowledge, and I knew pattern making. I knew how to go from a sloper to a blazer, but I had only worked on like models. I had never fit on myself. So that was something that once I started sewing for myself, I quickly realized was like a big blind spot for me. And I wasn't going to be able to create the kinds of clothing that I wanted unless I did that. So I started learning.
Yeah.
Just by picking up tech. I, at the time, worked for a woman who was like a former corset maker, and she made custom corsets for people. She was really great at fitting. And so I learned a lot from her, and then, had books and things like that. And I just made it happen. What about you? What's something you learned because you had a vision?
I think one thing that I can think of is learning to sew with knits. Because I wore a lot of knits and I do like to be comfortable. And that's something that was daunting to me at first, especially before I had a serger years ago. But I knew I wanted to sew knits, so I learned all the techniques to do that and eventually got a serger. And I really like sewing with knits now. I probably sew with knits about half the time when I'm sewing. So that's something that I had a very specific idea of what I wanted to make based on what I knew I liked to wear and what was comfortable to me.
Yeah, that's a good one. Knitwear. That's like such a game changer when you figure it out.
Yeah.
All right. The next tip is to focus on confidence building wins. So look for skills that will give you multiple victories, not just like one-time techniques. For example, learning to sew knits opens up a huge world of comfortable, like everyday garments, or mastering a good basic seam finish means that every single thing that you make will now look and feel better on the inside. I always recommend learning skills that you'll use over and over again because each time you use them, you'll get a little confidence boost and you'll also improve with each time you use them. Think about it. Would you rather spend time learning a really specialized technique that you might use once or something foundational that will improve everything you make? And I think these really multi-purpose techniques are especially vital early on in your sewing journey. And then you can get a little bit more specific as your skills improve.
Yeah. And even with those specific techniques, often there's an aspect of it that you can take into other types of techniques as well, whether that's learning how to sew more precisely or using a specialty presser foot, something like that.
And once you get to those more specialty things, you'll find that there are so many that it's not entirely new, that it's just the steps that you already you already know how to do, techniques you already know how to do, rearranged into different steps.
Yeah, exactly. The next tip is to match skills to patterns that you're excited about. I think this is really important. And this is where that learn as you sew philosophy that we talk about at Seamwork really, really shines. So instead of, just taking a class on installing zippers in isolation, for example, choose a dress pattern you love that happens to have a zipper and use that as the foundation for learning. Even if you're taking a class, you can combine that with a project that you're really, really excited about. And that way, you're not just learning the technique, you're creating something that's beautiful and that you'll really want to wear. For example, I did this with bound buttonholes. I definitely could have practiced on scraps forever, but instead I chose a blazer pattern that featured them. And in the end, I had this really gorgeous jacket and I had the skill to go with it that I could take into other projects. And the key is to choose patterns that stretch you just a little bit, not ones that require 5 new techniques all at once, but maybe something that has 1 new technique or 2 new techniques that you can practice. And it's something that you're really, really excited to make at the same time.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite pieces of advice for new sewers is just to choose something that has like a few new things.
Yeah.
All right. Our next tip is to consider your current frustration. So pay attention to what like is consistently bugging you about your finished projects. Are your hems like always kind of weird? Maybe it's time that you need to learn about different hemming techniques for different fabrics. Or do your garments never quite fit right through the bust? Perhaps like some basic fitting adjustments would be really game changing for you. Are you tired of seams that like fray and look messy on the inside? Then you can explore some different seam finishing techniques. I find that addressing your current pain points gives you so much immediate satisfaction. Sari, what's a skill that you learned specifically because it was driving you crazy?
Well, we talked about this a little bit, but seam finishes are definitely the big one that comes to mind for me. Just, it drove me nuts that my clothing looked so messy on the inside.
Yeah.
And once I learned how to finish seams, even just, with pinking shears,
Yeah.
I felt like I was taking a lot more care with what I was making and making things that would last. And that was really important to me. So I think that was probably the skill that comes to mind when I think about that question. What about you?
One thing that came to mind was darts, not how to sew them. I learned how to do that pretty early on, but how to make them look nice. I think you can take this same idea and you can apply it to things that you want to do better, not just things that you want to like learn how to do. So I remember like always being really frustrated by the way my darts looked, that it just was like so pointy.
Yeah.
And when I finally like took the time to slow down and like do a little research and figure out ways to like really optimize the way that my darts looked, it was a big game changer.
Yeah.
To my finished garments.
Yeah, definitely. We have a really good video on that, by the way, on the YouTube channel. If anybody wants to check it out, about how to make your darts look better.
Yeah, I'm very enthusiastic about this.
All right, our next tip is to think about fabric that you already own. I think this is a really practical approach. So look through your fabric stash and ask what techniques would help you use what you already have. So, for example, maybe you have this gorgeous silk that's been sitting there because you're nervous about working with slippery fabrics. Or perhaps you bought some really beautiful wool coating, but you've never made a lined or an unlined jacket before. So let your existing fabric guide your learning, because it's a great way to actually use your stash while building your skills. Plus, you've already invested in the fabric, so you have extra motivation to make that learning worthwhile. And I think fabric skills are one of the things that people struggle with the most, too.
Yeah. I like anything that encourages me to use something from my stash.
Yeah, me too. I've been really good about it lately, to be honest. I've been really incorporating a lot of fabrics from my stash. Still buying fabric once in a while, but I've been a lot better at it. The more planning I do, the more I use what's in my stash.
I love that.
Yeah.
I go through phases. All right. We have one more tip for you, and that's to make skills stick by teaching or sharing. Once you learn something new, finding a way to share that knowledge can really cement it in your mind, in your brain. Maybe you document your process for social media, or you can help a friend to learn the same technique. You can even just write notes to your future self about what worked and what didn't. Teaching really forces you to really understand the why behind the technique, not just the how. And I found that the skills that I've shared with others are the ones that really stick in my memory. There's lots of times where I think I know something really well, and then I write an article or a script or something, and I'm like, oh, wow, like it really does force you to slow down um, and break it down into the simplest terms and to really explore the why behind it all.
Yeah.
It's like the old saying goes, you don't really know something until you can teach it to someone else.
Yeah. Reminds me of what is that subreddit? It's like, explain it to me like I'm 5 or something like that.
I don't know that one, but yeah.
Or people ask questions. If you can explain it to a 5-year-old, then you truly understand it,
Uh-huh.
I think. All right, well, let me recap what we covered today. We talked about starting with your personal vision rather than arbitrary skill levels, focusing on techniques that'll build your confidence through repeated use, and matching new skills to patterns you're genuinely excited about. We also discussed addressing your current frustrations, using your existing fabric stash to guide your learning, and making skills stick by sharing what you've learned. So I think my big takeaway from this episode is that skill building should always serve your creative vision and not the other way around. So when you learn as you sew, tackling new techniques while making something that you're really, really excited to wear, the learning becomes so much more meaningful and a lot more memorable too. And I just think it really, most importantly, I think it increases your motivation. And I think that's so important when it comes to learning. What do you think? What's your big takeaway, Haley?
Yeah, I think just like asking yourself whenever you set out to learn a technique is like how can I make this fun?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Like, how can I make this more fun?
Yeah.
Is like this, in the simplest terms, the thesis of this podcast episode.
Yeah.
Is how can I be excited about this and how can I make it fun?
Yeah, I think that should be a thesis of this podcast generally. How do we make this more fun? Not that it's not already fun, but sometimes we can get into a mental headspace of not making it fun.
Yeah, totally. We have like a whole new tagline for CMARC Radio.
Making it fun. All right. So speaking of learning new skills while making something exciting, I'm really thrilled to teach you to tell you about our 2 new patterns this month, which are garnet and maple. So these are perfect examples of how you can build skills while creating beautiful pieces for your wardrobe. So I'll start with garnet, which is a classic placebo blouse with some really lovely details that would be great for practicing several different techniques. It features a lined yoke with gathers, full sleeves with button cuffs, and that gorgeous stand collar that extends into a bow. So if you've been wanting to work on your gathering technique or practice making professional-looking collars, this would be a really perfect project for you. And maple this is what I'm really, really excited about. It's a lined peacoat that's honestly just a masterclass in tailoring techniques. So it has an oversized collar, double-breasted styling, single welt pockets, and adjustable sleeve tabs. So if outerwear construction is on your skill building list, this coat would take you through so many essential techniques in one beautiful project. And what I really love about it is that it's so classic. Like a lined peacoat, you're going to have that forever.
Yeah, really worthwhile investment of your time.
Yeah, absolutely. So both patterns are available now for CMARC members, and they're exactly what we've been talking about today, ways to learn new skills while creating something that you'll be excited about. So if you like this episode, we'd love it if you would leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you're listening to us right now. It really helps other people to find the show. So we super appreciate all your reviews. You can also follow us on YouTube at CMARC Video. You can follow us on Instagram at CMARC. And if you'd like to become part of the CMARC community, head over to cmarc.com to learn how to join us. And that's it for us this week. I'm Sari.
And I'm Haley.
And this is CMARC Radio.